Good morning, all. So today's session is on the topics. The topic of the today's session is a confluence of cryptography, distributed computing, and game theory. So this will be going to deliver by Dr. Kannan Srinathan. He is an assistant professor at IIIT Hyderabad. He has completed his PhD degree in computer science and engineering from IIT Chennai. His research interests include cryptography, distributed computing, and quantum algorithms. He has published over 100 research papers in reputed international journals and conference proceedings. He is a recipient of IBM Outstanding PhD Students Award 2006 and Microsoft Young Faculty Fellowships Award in 2008. I invite Dr. Kannan Srinathan start his delivered. I request to him to deliver his talk, and I request to all participants at the end of these sessions they can put their questions in the chat box one by one, and Dr. Srinathan will answer to these questions. Thank you once again, Dr. Srinathan, accepting our request and invite you to this faculty development program. So you can start your lectures.
Thank you very much, sir. So
Welcome.
Hope the screen is visible to all of you and I am audible too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's begin. So we'll talk about blockchain. It is an interdisciplinary field. Namely, there are three fields that intersect in blockchain. One is the field of cryptography, the other is of distributed computing, and the third one is game theory. So what we'll see today is how these three fields come together to solve the blockchain problem. So at a very high level, we'll be doing only two things. One is what is the problem that blockchain solves and what is the solution. Now, it's not a normal problem that blockchain solves. Blockchain actually solves a very hard problem. So we have to actually give evidence for the fact that it is very hard, and that we will do. So about 15 minutes or something will be spent on why is it a hard problem. And then it's not a normal solution, it's a very pleasing solution. So we'll spend the rest of the hour to actually understand why it is not just a normal solution, but a very pleasing solution. So let's begin with the hard problems. At a very high level, the problem can be stated as follows. I will start with three English words. So first word is trust. So it is a very common English word connotation we know. So we want formally define what trust is, because we understand informally what it is. We leave it at that, at the big picture. We can look at it more formally later, or possibly in a full-fledged course on blockchain. So the second value word, that is again an English word. The value, everyone understands what value is, and therefore we won't spend too much time on that. The third word is size. Of course, size here is say number of users and stuff like that. So this also is fairly well understood in its connotation. So notice that not only do we understand what trust is, what value is, what size is, we also know that usually trust begets value. So wherever there is trust, automatically there is value. For instance, if you have a 10 rupee note, it's not that innately that piece of paper is actually valued at 10 rupees. Or if you have a 2000 rupee note, it's not like that piece of paper is innately having a value of 2000 rupees. It is because of the trust we have on Reserve Bank of India. So if you see, the government would have signed that I promise to pay the bearer a value of 2000 rupees, and that is why you get the value. So the entire value is begot from the trust we have on RBI, not so much the innate value. So it is the trust we have on Reserve Bank of India that creates the value. Of course, RBI is not as trustworthy in Pakistan as much as in India. So in Pakistan, that piece of paper will have only the innate value. So whatever is the paper's value, that is the value that will have. It will not have 2000 rupees of value, even if it is printed as though it's 2000 rupees. The trust is deficit there, and therefore the trust on RBI is deficit. They'll have their own currency, their own trust, and and therefore everyone understands that trust will beget value. Equally well known is that value will beget size. So if something is valuable, there will be a lot of users. So how many people use Indian currency? No, all of India uses, the billions of people are there. So we use Indian currency. So like 130 crore users of Indian currency because it has value. So if it has no value, of course, we know if you demonetize and say this piece of paper has no value, then the trust goes away in that, and quickly we find that there is no user. So trust begets value, value begets size. These are all very well known. Now the buck stops here. Therefore, there are a lot of possibilities of scams and Ponzi schemes, because we know that you have to start from trust, and you know that trust will beget value, and then you know value will beget size. But if size cannot get back trust, which it usually may not be able to get back, if size cannot get back trust, then you'll have scams where there was a hype trust, and then the value became real because of the hype trust, and size became real, and then suddenly trust, because it was hyped, disappeared and value disappeared, but size cannot disappear. They will feel cheated, right? So you find that many of these scams happen because this is not a closed loop. It stops at trust begets value, value begets size, and that's about it. So if you are able to close this loop, it will be magical, because then many of the Ponzi style of scams cannot happen, because at any given day, even if trust is not real and the corresponding value is hyped, size can never be hyped. Size is always real, and if real size can actually beget trust, then the trust automatically becomes real, and then value automatically becomes real, and therefore you can bootstrap reality into even hyped systems, provided you close this loop, and therefore you cannot have Ponzi schemes where you can cheat millions of people and run away with the money, because once you have millions of people, automatically the trust should have come, if somehow we are able to close the loop of how to beget trust from size. It will be magical. So that is the big picture. Blockchains help us distribute trust, and in a way help us solve the problem of how to beget trust from size. The more the users, the more the trust in the system, and it grows. Now, what is the technical challenge? So it's a big picture. So what is so difficult about doing this? The difficulty is, we know that many drops of water make a mighty ocean. So if whatever you put drop by drop, you will get a mighty effect of the same thing. Now, if you notice that, if you assume that every part of the system is not trustworthy, and you have a collection of untrustworthy nodes, and you want to simulate trustworthiness, collection of drops of water will give you an ocean of water. A collection of drops of distrust will give you an ocean of distrust. So if you have too many untrustworthy nodes, it should be very easy to simulate an ocean of distrustworthy or untrustworthy system. How do you actually get something that is not there in the drops, but it will be there in the collection? So it is not easy. For instance, you may recall certain proverbs, something like too many cooks spoil the broth. So it is not that the cooks are bad on their own. So they are actually good cooks. However, when they come together, they spoil the broth because of a reason which we call as consensus is not easy. So somebody will have a recipe, somebody will have a variant of that recipe, some third person will have a third variant, and because they are unable to agree on within themselves and decide what is to be done, the broth gets spoiled. So you will not get good food, even though each of the cooks is actually a good cook on their own. Even then, consensus is not easy. There is consensus among even good cooks is not easy. However, real life is not that benign. There are outright malicious people also. For instance, if you have a cook who is outright there to spoil the broth, in the sense he is going to add sugar instead of salt, or he is going to add mirchi powder beyond a certain threshold. So he's out there outright to actually spoil the broth. Then how do you solve the problem? So why should that be the reality. So if you want to build a cryptocurrency using blockchains, so they are out there to actually cheat you. Somebody will say, I spent the money to buy a fridge, and then the same money also will buy a TV, and then somebody has to decide whether that money has been used for buying the fridge or the TV. So the left side of the peer-to-peer network, he will give a message saying, I want to buy a TV. Right side of the network, he will say, I want to buy a fridge. The network will keep fighting with each other, and by the time he will run away with both the objects. So everybody is there out to cheat, assuming that. Then consensus becomes very important, because the network has to now agree on whether that money has been used to buy a fridge or a TV. And if consensus is not easy, then you find that building cryptocurrencies also will not be easy. That's a big challenge. And how big a challenge that is? So it is very, very big to begin with. In the absence of cryptography, if you use distributed computing alone, it is outright impossible, and that's what we'll prove first. So using distributed computing alone in many settings, especially the ones that we are worried about in cryptocurrencies, distributed computing alone, you'll find that solving the consensus or agreement problem is impossible. You bring in cryptography next, it may become possible. Then you bring in some more distributed computing, it becomes even more better. And then you bring in game theory, you'll get a full-fledged solution, and that is our blockchain solution. So let us start with understanding why is agreement a fundamental problem, and why is it impossible in several settings without using other fields. That is using only distributed computing. Why is it that it is impossible? So why is it fundamental? Of course, agreement is fundamental because if you want to collaborate with a group of people, first of all, you want to agree that you want to collaborate. Second of all, you have to agree who are there in the group. Third, you have to agree like what you want to do. Fourth, you have to agree how to do it. Fifth, you have to agree whether you have done it or not. So whether the program terminated or not. So even if you agree that program terminated, you have to now agree on what is the output. And therefore, at every step in any distributed world, agreement will be fundamental. And if it turns out that this agreement is difficult or impossible, it will affect every walk of a distributed system. So formal definition of Byzantine agreement is that you need to design a protocol where every processor or player starts with the input, say 1 bit, 0 or 1, and the goal is everybody should decide on the same output. So that is the agreement, and that output should be a valid output. That is valid here means it should be the initial input of some non-faulty process. And of course, termination means you should actually stop. It cannot run forever. So within a finite amount of time, we should be able to make every non-faulty process agree on a valid input. So that is what is the problem. And you can view this as if you have broadcast channels, you can solve Byzantine agreement because everybody can broadcast and everybody can see what everybody's other's input is and take some local function of that and agree. Similarly, if you can solve Byzantine agreement, you can also do broadcast. So that relation between Byzantine agreement and broadcast is that if you want somebody to broadcast, he can send that value to everybody and they can run a Byzantine agreement protocol. So there is a relation between broadcast and Byzantine agreement. Question is why is broadcast so difficult in P2P system? So before we look at the impossibility proof, we look at intuitively why is it difficult. So if somebody says the sender has to broadcast information to every other person, so why can't you run a naive solution like send the message to everybody? So A wants to broadcast to say B and C in a network of just 3 people, let us say. Why can't A send the message M to B and A unicast the message M to C? So why can't a collection of unicast be treated as a solution for broadcast? So in that case, you can make everybody agree. So I can send my input to everybody and that's about it. Now, what is amiss there is that if you look at the solution this way, a collection of unicast, if you dream that will solve the broadcast problem, the dream collapses or does not hold water on many counts. First one is what is written here, the atomicity problem. So let us see what is the problem. Suppose you want to simulate broadcast by collection of unicasts. A, after sending the message to B, so A sent a message to B, and before sending that message to C, if there is a power failure at A, then notice that B feels that the broadcast happened, whereas C feels that the broadcast did not happen. Why does B feel broadcast happened? Because B got the message. Why does C feel that a broadcast did not happen? Because before the A could send the message to C, A failed because of a power failure or something. Therefore, if there was a physical broadcast channel, such settings or scenarios would not occur. Either both B and C will get it, or neither B or C will get it. It cannot be that one B gets it but C does not get it. Such a scenario should not occur in case of a physical broadcast channel, and therefore should not also occur in case of a simulated broadcast channel. But then such a simulation cannot just be do a collection of unicasts, because where is the guarantee that everybody got it? So it's quite possible that everybody did not get it. And to make matters worse, if it is a Byzantine agreement problem, it means people can be Byzantine faulty. That is, they can actually actively try to disrupt the system. They can run codes which are not delegated to them at all. And that would be, in this case, something like A sends message M1 to B and message M2 to C, where M1 is not equal to M2, and therefore such things which are impossible in case of a physical broadcast channel where he has to send same message to everybody. In a simulated broadcast channel, especially if it is simulated naively by just collection of unicasts, you can subvert the system by just sending different messages to different parts of the network, and that is a serious trouble in terms of blockchains or cryptocurrencies where different network believes that you spend the same amount differently, and you need to actually solve this problem. And it turns out that if there are three people, say ABC, as we said, then this broadcast problem cannot be solved purely by using distributed computing alone. And that is the proof we'll see first, even though to understand the in-depth of blockchain and how it works, you may not need to know the details of the impossibility proofs of Byzantine agreement. However, we'll add this for two reasons. One is these kind of proofs are interesting in their own right, and therefore we can quickly see it will be useful. Other is that the fact that something that was shown as impossible is what blockchain solves gives weight to the original comment that blockchain solves a hard problem. So now I can change it to no, blockchain does not just solve a hard problem, it solves a proven impossible problem, and that makes things very fascinating for us. When we go forward, we'll be able to see how, even though it is logically impossible, how does cryptography fit in and how does game theory fit in finally to actually solve the problem. So that way it will be useful for us to see why it is impossible. Now, before giving the formal proof of the impossibility, which I'll just do it very quickly, I'll give you intuition of why it is impossible. The intuition arises from the following fact. If there is some information that is known to only two people in the world and those two people contradict each other, there is no way for a third person to find out who is the liar. So that is the basis. For instance, if B sent a message to C and B claims that he sent a 0 and C claims that he received a 1. Now there is no way for A to say who is the liar, because intuitively A is sure that one of the person is lying, otherwise there will be no contradiction. So B says he sent a 0, C says he received a 1. There is no way that both are honest. At least one of them is lying, assuming that the channel is perfect. So that's the assumption here. So if it is not perfect, we can simulate perfectness by error correction codes or other things, so we'll not worry about that. So assuming that the channel is fault free, if B sent a 0 or is claiming to having sent a 0 and C is claiming to have received a 1, at least one of them is liar. Now if A's job is to find out or localize who is the liar, what we want to see intuitively is that is not going to happen, because what can A do? A can again go to B and say C is claiming to have received a 1, so you should be lying. So B will say no, C is lying. C actually received a 0, he is lying. So go to C and ask, B is claiming that you are a liar, what will C do? C will say no, B is lying. So the honest person will say the other person is lying because he is honest. The dishonest person will say other person is lying because he is dishonest. And this conundrum can never be broken, and that is what is mathematically captured by the following proof. So what we talked so far is the intuitive proof. Scientists cannot accept this as a proof. So therefore, let us see how such a proof will go through in mathematics. So suppose you have a Byzantine agreement protocol in the network of ABC, and what do you mean by Byzantine agreement protocol? You have the agreement and the validity conditions and termination conditions. That is, you have to agree on one of the valid inputs, and all non-faulty process should output the same value, which is the value of one of the inputs. Suppose you have a Byzantine agreement protocol in the triangle network ABC, we will show that there must exist another network called alpha here, that is a hexagon network, such that this network has to be self-consistent. Then we will show that this network is not self-consistent or is contradictory. Therefore, there cannot exist a Byzantine agreement protocol there. So to formalize our intuition of the fact that you cannot localize a layer beyond 1 out of 2. Okay, so let us see how that goes. So for instance, step 1, consider a situation where A is actually faulty and B and C are starting with input 0. Now Byzantine agreement protocol says that since all non-faulty processes are starting with the input 0, all non-faulty process should also output 0, because the output should be equal to the input of at least one non-faulty person. Now every non-faulty person is starting with the same input, and therefore the output also has to be 0. So far so good. However, this faulty A can be faulty in any which way, and therefore the faulty A can, suppose is faulty exactly as follows. He decides to be a split personality and try to behave like A with respect to B and like A dash with respect to C. That is, whenever he talks to B, he talks like the network as though his input is 0, and whatever he does in the network alpha, he will do in alpha 1. Whenever he talks to C, he talks as though his input is 1, and whatever A dash does to C in alpha, he will do it in alpha 1. Therefore, executions alpha 1 and alpha are indistinguishable to B and C, because B and C talk to A, and A is acting like a split personality. For B, he's saying my input is 0, but for C, he's saying my input is 1, and behaving exactly like in alpha. Therefore, there is no way for B and C together to find out whether they're in alpha 1 or whether they're in alpha. Now, given that B and C cannot differentiate whether they're in alpha 1 or alpha, whatever you output in alpha 1, you have to output in alpha 2. Now, given that in alpha 1 you are assuming they are running a Byzantine agreement protocol, you are sure that they are going to output 0 in alpha 1, because both the non-faulty process started with input 0, right? Therefore, the output in alpha should also be 0. So far so good, no contradiction. However, you can do the same analysis if A dash B dash are starting with input 1. You can ensure that this A dash B dash cannot distinguish whether they are in alpha 2 network or whether they are in the network alpha, and because they cannot distinguish between these two, because C can act as a split personality like C dash and C whenever he talks to A dash, C will talk like input 0, and whenever he talks to B dash, C dash will behave like input 1, and therefore the adversary can ensure that A dash B dash cannot differentiate whether they're in alpha network or alpha 2 network. Like in alpha 2, it is Byzantine agreement, and therefore in alpha 2 they should agree on output 1, because all the inputs are 1. Therefore, we know that the output of A dash B dash in alpha should also be 1 each. Still no contradiction. Contradiction arises when you say, consider the situation where B is faulty. B acts as a split personality in such a way that C and A dash cannot differentiate whether they are in network alpha 3 or alpha. But since it's a Byzantine agreement protocol, you are saying that output of A dash and output of C has to agree. But you notice here that A dash already decided to output 1, C already decided to output 0, and therefore it is impossible that A dash and C can actually output the same value. And therefore, if there is a Byzantine agreement protocol in a triangle of which one of them is Byzantine faulty, then it is contradicting the fact that C and A dash will have to agree on their output, even though C has to output 0 and A dash has to output 1. And this is a impossibility proof for Byzantine agreement for 1 out of 3. However, notice that if cryptography is there, then we can solve this problem. So to get a view of why cryptography helps, so let us assume that digital signatures exist, and that is, you can sign messages in such a way that nobody can forge that in polynomial time, or no efficient adversary can forge. Now to the original intuition of, if B sent a 0 and C claimed a 1, B sent a 0 and C received a 1, we said there is no way for A to find out who is the liar. That is because we didn't use digital signatures. If we use digital signatures, there is a way in which A can find out who is the liar. So let us see how that will work. So A will simply ask for C to give B's signature on 1, because C is claiming that he received a 1 from B. So A will say, if your claim is that you received a 1 from B, show me B's signature on 1. Now, if C shows B signature on 1, A knows B is lying, because there is no way C can produce B signature on 1 unless he sent a 1. But if C is lying, there is no way for C to produce B signature on 1 because he received a 0. Therefore, by simply asking the question to the receiver, you claim to receive 1, just show me the sender's signature on 1, is enough to actually find out whether B is lying or C is lying, and this conundrum breaks. So therefore, this impossibility proof is a roundabout impossibility proof for saying digital signatures or perfect digital signatures don't exist, because if digital signatures exist, you can solve the 1 out of 3 agreement problem. Whereas we know that 1 out of 3 agreement is impossible, therefore perfect digital signatures have to be impossible. But why do you need perfect signatures? We'll use computational signatures the way that we use in cryptography, and we can solve this agreement problem, and more on this solution much later. So far what we have seen is that blockchain solves a hard problem. Now we'll move to the solution part. So we said originally that we will answer 2 questions. One is what is the hard problem it solves, other is what is the pleasing solution. So we saw what is the hard problem. The hard problem is to distribute trust, and to distribute trust, agreement is important. Agreement itself is impossible only using distributed computing. We need other fields too. So the 3 fields, if you see, they are involved: distributed computing for actually giving the base for the problem, then cryptography or digital signatures and other things to actually give solutions to that problem. However, those solutions by themselves also will see that they will be subtly having some limitations and drawbacks, and we'll bring in a 3rd field called game theory to solve everything together. Now these 3 fields, if you see, are mutually orthogonal to each other. Let us see why. So distributed computing is about simulating ubiquity, simulating omnipresence. Cryptography believes that there is no omnipotent adversary, in the sense it is so much embroiled in the fact that time as a resource is very precious. You cannot actually do a brute force attack in polynomial time in the input size. So distributed computing is about space, cryptography is about time or lack of time, and game theory is mostly about partial knowledge. So if you don't know full thing about what your adversary is going to play, how do you respond even in those situations? So given that space, time and knowledge are complementary, there should be some problem that is very hard, so much so that each of these fields cannot solve it, but together they can solve because they are complementary to each other. Now it turns out that blockchain is one such example, a canonical, classical example of that hard problem, where you bring in these 3 fields together, you can actually distribute trust. So you can get trust from size. So rest of the talk is about how to solve it. So we'll do that in about 30 to 40 minutes. So we'll see how to actually solve, and then we'll have enough time for question answers. So how to solve it? So heat here is how to distribute trust, right? So how do we solve it? So we can directly give the solution, but I have decided to do it in the following way. First, we'll learn enough about the field called cryptography and try to solve it only using cryptography. And it will not be enough. There will be some deficiencies or lacunae in the solution. Then we'll learn about some more distributed computing and try to bring in that and solve using cryptography and distributed computing. We'll try to solve it together. Here we'll see that you get a working solution, all right, but it will have its own limitations in certain settings, as well as it will have deadly impractical limitations in some other settings. In some settings it will be subtly impractical, in other settings it will be totally impractical. Then we'll bring in a 3rd field called game theory, and this will give us a wholesome solution to the problem. At this point, after learning the solution, we need to name the solution. The name that world has given to that solution is called blockchains. So that is just in the name. You are free to call it anything. So let us see the solution first, and then we'll give a name later. So let's begin by understanding cryptography, and then see how to solve the problem of cryptocurrency using cryptography alone, and then why we fail. So we can't understand all of cryptography in a short period of time, so we'll try and understand only the one main aspect of it, and other things will derive very quickly and leave it to you to read on your own. So one main question is, how do you publish the key and yet remain secure? So that is the main conundrum. So in public key cryptography, if you understand how do you publish the key and yet remain secure, in public key cryptography, it will become fairly easy to also understand digital signatures and other things, and we can proceed. So how do we do this? So if you publish the key, everyone knows the key, full information about it. Then how do you keep it secure? So it turns out that knowing something in terms of information is not the same as the ability to use that thing for certain operations, because the ease of computation depends on how that information is represented, and it also depends on what the operation is. For example, suppose the information is natural numbers. It doesn't mean that every representation of natural numbers is equally suitable for every operation. For instance, I have given 3 different representations here. One is Roman representation, other is decimal or binary representation. Third is product of primes representation. So what is product of primes representation? Because from fundamental theorem of arithmetic, we know that every number can uniquely be represented as product of primes modulo some permutation. So you can change the order, but still it is unique representation, but for the permutation. So given these 3 representations, we will now argue that for operations such as multiplication, the most suitable with respect to efficiency of the operation, the most suitable is actually the product of primes representation, and the worst is Roman representation. Is for instance, if somebody says what is 2 power 3 into 2 power 4, there are very fast algorithms which can give you the answer, and there are no linear time algorithms to give you the answer in the decimal representation or binary representation. There is no linear time algorithm to multiply. There are quadratic time algorithms and subquadratic also, but everything is super linear, whereas there are sublinear time algorithms to multiply in product of primes representation. Multiplication cannot be done very easily unless you have a lookup table and stuff like that for Roman, so we can forget about Roman for now. Addition, for instance, on the other hand, is very easy to do, or very fast algorithms exist for addition in decimal and binary. Linear time algorithms exist, but no polynomial time algorithm is known for adding 2 numbers in product of primes form and give the answer in product of primes form. So you want to add 2 numbers in product of primes form, there are no efficient algorithms. So notice that the one representation that was the best for multiplication turned out to be the worst for addition. For comparison, for instance, both say are good, but one is better than the other for sure. For instance, decimal or binary is much better than product of primes. For comparison, product of primes, there are no linear time algorithms, even though there are polynomial time algorithms for comparing 2 numbers in product of primes. There are no linear time algorithms, whereas there is very fast linear time algorithm for comparison from MSB to LSB. You can compare in binary or in decimal. So to digress a bit from here, notice that we are using decimal or binary. You are teaching decimal in LKG or binary in school or in computers, because all common operations can be done very fast except for multiplication. So open problem here would be, is there a representation of natural numbers where you can do addition, comparison and multiplication in linear time? Suppose you are able to find such a representation, it will be a revolution even bigger than blockchain, because all of computing and all of our human endeavors will have to start using the new representation, because binary is no longer going to be the best. if there is a new representation of natural numbers where addition, comparison, and multiplication can be done in linear time. But that's a digression for us. That's an open problem also. But we understand why is decimal system very popular, because for the most common operation, namely comparison, which is the most common operation in real life, unfortunately, that is the root cause of all malices or sadness. But nevertheless, it is the most frequent operation in real life, and comparison can be done very fast in decimal. The next most frequent operation is addition, that can be done very fast in decimal. Multiplication, third most frequent operation, medium, and no other representation is close, and therefore decimal, binary, and all are very popular. However, in situations where multiplication and addition were more frequent, you could use Chinese remainder theorem based residue system and so on. And what is it got its relation to cryptography or public key cryptography? Notice that slowness can be to our advantage. We are not here to build very good representations for doing fast operations always. We are saying sometimes if you can show that some operations are deadly slow, that can be very advantageous, and that will give us a template for public key cryptography. The template will look like follows. Suppose you have a key, let us say natural numbers or whatever, and we have it in two different representations, R1 and R2, and you have an operation, say encryption operation. If you can show that the encryption operation is very fast in the R2 representation of the key, the decryption operation, that is the inverse of the encryption operation, is very slow in R2 representation of the key, but is very fast in R1 representation of the key, then we know how to build a public key crypto system. How to build? So choose a key in R1, R2, you publish the R2 representation, anybody can encrypt, but nobody can decrypt, but because you have the R1 representation, you can decrypt, right? So this is the template. So we say you publish the key, but nobody can, still it is secure because the representation used to publish the key's information is different from the representation used by the authorized receiver. So that the decryption operation runs for billions of years, even though it is always possible to convert from one representation to another. It takes billions of years to do the conversion from R2 to R1, whereas converting from R1 to R2 is easy. It takes billions of years to convert back, and therefore you get the security for all practical purposes. It is truly and in principle acceptable. Even though this template was known, instantiating this template was not easy and still is not easy. Let us see why. Because to show things are fast, you know how to do it very easily. You can write algorithms and time it. You can say I designed a very fast algorithm for such and such a job. But to show that some things are very slow, you just cannot say that my algorithm is slow. You have to show that every algorithm that is ever possible is slow, and contemporary mathematics falls way short of giving such lower bound proofs in general. Therefore, you have to make do with crypto systems like RSA, which say that I presume that I have instantiated this template, even though I have no proof that I have done that. For instance, what does RSA do? It says natural numbers is the key, and decimal representation or binary is the public representation. Product of primes representation is the private representation, and the encryption algorithm is modular exponentiation. There are very fast algorithms to do modular exponentiation in decimal representation or binary representation. There are no known algorithms to do the ETH root, whatever that means in number theory, to take the ETH root. We know what it means in number theory, that is to the power d, where E into d is concurrent to 1 modulo the Euler quotient of k. So that's what it is in number theory. So the ETH root has no efficient algorithm in decimal representation, but it has efficient algorithm in product of primes representation, and therefore together you have instantiated this template and you got the RSA crypto system. Many crypto systems exist, but all of them have this same drawback of they instantiate this template. They show that wherever things have to be fast, they show that it is fast, but wherever they have to show that it is very slow, they only conjecture that it is very slow. They are not able to prove it from scratch. All right. So this is what is cryptography. We can use this not only for public key crypto systems, you can also use it to build collision resistant hashing. Notice that hashing algorithms are many-to-one maps, compression maps, and collisions are nothing but two different inputs going to the same output. Now compression leads to collision because compression means your domain is much larger than your range or codomain. Therefore, it has to be a many-to-one map, and if it is a many-to-one map, finding a collision, existence of collision is guaranteed. How does cryptographer work with this? He say existence of a collision is guaranteed. However, can we not ensure that finding the collision takes billions of years, even though they exist? So like we saw that even though conversion from one representation to another in the public key to secret key is possible, we said it takes billions of years. Similarly, can we not have a situation where collision exists, but finding it will take billions of years? So as good as a collision does not exist for practical purposes. So how do we do that? So notice that if compression ratio is higher, the tougher it should be to find collision resistance. Easier it should be to find a collision, because if the compression ratio, if domain is much larger, the larger the domain and higher the compression, the easier it should be to find a collision resistance. And Merkle and Drabka transform says that give me some collision resistant hash function which has a very small compression ratio, something like 2, then I can give you almost unbounded compression ratio. And their scheme works like this. Say if I have a small h which is a compressing a 2 n-bit string to n-bit, so 50% compression ratio, then you can actually use that in an iterative fashion to compress very large strings as follows. So you divide the last string into several n bits, x1, x2, x3 in blocks of n, and then first you hash x1, get the output, then you concatenate the next n bits and compress again, hash again, get set 2, and then do this, and finally you add the length of the whole thing and compress it. If h is collision resistant, that is you can't find a collision in small h, then the whole thing also will be collision resistant with a very high compression ratio. Things are not tough to prove here at all. For instance, the intuition of the proof is if capital H is not collision resistant, you got a collision for capital H. Now capital H is the output of some small h, so you got a collision for capital H, which means you should have found 2 inputs for capital H, which will give 2 different inputs, which will give the same output for capital H. That has to have be different at some location, and at that location it will also be different for small h, and you will get a collision for small h. So collision for capital H implies a collision for small h, because capital H, the inputs have to differ in some block. So whichever the last block it differs, that will automatically give a collision for small h. But you said collision for small h is tough to find, and therefore collision for capital H is also tough to find. Now given that you can do this, you just have to get a collision resistant hash function with 50% compression. So using discrete log, they just say that you can define a hash function of 2 numbers between say 0 and p minus 1, or in general 1 to q, where q is the order of the cyclic group. So if you have 2 numbers between integers between 1 and q, and define the hash of that to be g power x1 to h power x2 in the group, then notice that 2 n bits of input is going to n bits of output, and you can show that if discrete log problem is solved, then this is a collision resistant hash function. Then apply Merkle-Drabka transform, you will get a provable version of collision resistant hash functions. Similarly, and even though we know perfect signatures is impossible, because we already had a roundabout proof for that, because they imply Byzantine agreement, which in turn is impossible in 1 out of 3 cases. But we can have digital signatures which are computationally secure or computationally not forgeable. So if I want to sign some message, you generate your public key secret key, and you can have your signature, which is some function of message and the secret key. The verifier can verify that only that person who knows the secret key can produce the signature for that message, and there is one and only one person who knows the secret key, and that authenticates the sender. So more on this in a separate talk. For instance, if you want to do RSA based signature schemes, it is simply the public key is n, which is p into q, then the Euler quotient of n is p minus 1 into q minus 1, and E is public, D is is part of the private key such that E into D is concurrent to 1 modulo P minus 1 to Q minus 1. Signature will be take the hash of the message and take to the power D mod n, and this we can show under RSA assumption and random oracle assumption is indeed secure. Okay, so much to begin for cryptography. We assume that we know what you mean by collision relational hashing. For instance, Bitcoin uses SHA-256. We think we know about digital signatures. So Bitcoin uses ECDSA, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. You think we know about public key systems, so RSA, LGMAL, and stuff like that. So we'll use this as black box. We won't worry about how you instantiate it. We have fairly good idea about how to argue about them philosophically in their existence. All come from the fact that you represent the key in two different ways. Given that with this knowledge, in the next 20 minutes or so, we'll try and build our own crypto system. And if you use only cryptographic techniques, we'll see that we fail. And then we'll bring in distributed computing and then we'll see that we almost pass, but we still fail in many aspects. Then we'll bring in game theory and we'll pass with flying colors, and that will be our pleasant solution to the problem of cryptocurrencies or to the problem of agreement, however you look at it. And we'll give a name to that solution. That's the blockchain. All right. So let us see how to use cryptography first and fail, and then use distributed computing also and fail, and then use game theory and pass with flying colors. So if you use cryptography alone and build our cryptocurrency, let's see how to go about it. So notice that if you want to build a cryptocurrency, what are the two main properties you are looking for? So first property you are looking for is that everyone should know who is the current owner. For instance, I should be able to generate my coin, and anyone should be able to verify publicly that my coin belongs to me. So that is the first property. What is the second property? The current owner should be able to transact and spend it and transfer ownership. So any system that has these two properties will automatically have the feeling of a currency, because everyone can publicly verify who the current owner is, and the current owner can transfer the ownership to new owner. And now everybody can publicly verify who the new owner is, and so on and so forth. So all we are looking for is simple two properties. One is everybody should be able to publicly verify who the current owner is, and the current owner should be able to transfer ownership. So let us see how to do that with cryptography. Now notice that digital signatures are publicly verifiable. If I sign a message, anybody in the world can verify. Therefore, the public verifiable nature of a digital signature scheme directly means that I can make a coin whose owner can be publicly verified, because I can make the owner sign the message saying I am the owner, and everybody can publicly verify. So the first aspect, namely how to make a setting where everybody can publicly verify who the current owner is fairly straightforward. It's just a transitive property derived from the public verifiability of digital signatures. Now how to get the second property? Now suppose everyone knows that I am the current owner and I want to transfer ownership. So how do I transfer ownership? So I could take a new piece of paper and say I am transferring the ownership to you and sign it. Now how do I address you? I will address you with your public key. So I can say I am transferring the ownership to the to your public key. Simple, but not that simple, because who knows whether the transfer came directly or later on you can take a third piece of paper and say no, I didn't transfer it to you directly, I transferred to a third party and the third party transferred to you, or I can tamper the paper and say that no, after I paid to you I said no, I'm taking it back, and so on. So there are several such issues. How do you make it tamper proof? How do you ensure that nobody can come in between this transaction later on and create confusion? They do that with hash pointers. What is a hash pointer? So the hash of the previous block, if you store in the next block here is block of transactions. We are using only one coin, so there's only one transaction, so it's not block of transactions, or block with one. Okay, so if I have the hash of the previous things stored here, then notice that there is guarantee that coin that originally belonged to me is now directly transferred to you, and nobody can change it now. If I want to do multiple transactions, very easy. So I take a new piece of paper, I sign it saying I transfer the ownership to you and give the hash of the previous block here. Now you have to transfer it to Bob. Simple. You take a third piece of paper and sign with your signature saying I am transferring the ownership to Bob and give the hash of the previous block to this. Now notice that together everybody can check that the coin that originally belonged to me has been transferred to you and the coin that subsequently belonged to you was further transferred to Bob and current owner is Bob. So everything will be clear. Nobody can change anything because of the hash pointer and other things. Very good. So it looks like we have solved the cryptocurrency problem. So we are happy, except that we haven't solved the cryptocurrency problem because some things can go wrong. And how do you know what can go wrong? We can detail out the problem. And how do we correct it? We'll bring in another field called distributed computing to correct it. We'll not be able to correct it fully, and therefore we'll get a third field also later on. So what can go wrong with cryptography alone working towards a solution based on digital signatures, hash pointers, and public key crypto systems? What can go wrong? See what can go wrong. Consider the following transaction. So I created my coin. Everybody can publicly verify that I am the owner of the coin. No problem. I can transfer that to you by having a hash pointer to this and signing that I am transferring the ownership to you. No problem. You can transfer the ownership to Alice by taking a piece of paper and saying I am transferring the ownership to Alice and putting hash pointer to the previous block. Everybody can publicly verify that the coin that belonged to me then belonged to you and then now it belongs to Alice. Till here also no problem. However, nothing in cryptography prevents you from creating a fourth piece of paper and saying it's your signature anyway and saying I am transferring this to Bob also. So then notice that what you have done here is a double spending, and this is problematic because you do not know who the current owner is. As long as it is a chain, it is a cryptocurrency. The moment it is not a chain, it does not have a cryptocurrency property because you do not know who the current owner is, because first it was transferred to you, then you transferred to Alice, you also transferred to Bob. Now who is the current owner? Both Alice and Bob are current owners. Now current owner has to be only one person. Therefore, what goes wrong is nothing goes wrong as long as it is a chain. But the moment it does not have the property that is a chain, you do not know who the current owners, things do go wrong. Now, how can you stop from double spending? Not easy. So this is the problem of double spending. So how can you stop from double spending? If you are the owner, you have all the right to spend. Nobody can stop you from spending multiple times because you can do that in parallel. So at least after you have made the decision to spend, and then a while has taken place, and then you decide to spend again, maybe you can stop that. But if you decide to spend at the same time, who can stop that? Because you are the owner and nobody knows the ownership has not been transferred. At the same time, you can always transfer the ownership using the same protocol to any number of people. So it is a tough problem. So you need to solve it. So to solve it, we'll bring in another field. So we'll bring in a field called distributed computing and solve it. We'll bring it at a very mild level first, and then we'll bring it at a major level. We'll solve it through agreement, and then see that this solves the problem in many systems, all right, but it's impractical in most of the cases, and also in some cases does not even solve it. So we have to bring a third field, and that will become the blockchain. So how do we solve the double spending problem? So all that you need to do is get rid of the fork, and somebody has to tell you what the chain is. So you can also always do that with simply publishing the transaction history and trusting me. So trusting me means you whenever there is a problem, you come to me because I was the original creator of the coin. You come to me, I will tell you which chain is to choose. So how will I tell you? I'll just hash that. I'll put my hash on only one of the chains, and therefore you can quickly see that I am signing one of the chains, and therefore I have decided which chain is correct. The other one is orphaned. So basically, to the problem of how to get back the chain property. Among all possible chains that are there, somebody has to choose what that is. So if you trust me, I can choose that. Now, what is wrong with this solution? Even though it works, the problem is that if you are trusting me, then you don't need so much difficulty. You can trust RBI, and RBI will say which of the currencies are valid, which are not, and that's the end of the story. So if you are trusting some centralized entity, what is the big deal? Therefore, this is not a good solution. You need a better solution than that, than just publishing the transaction history and somebody picking, some trustworthy guy picking which is the correct chain. So how do you decentralize the trust? So idea to decentralize the trust is simple. Idea is simple, but to realize it within distributed computing is not so easy. Bringing game theory, you will get an elegant blockchain solution. So let us see what is the idea. The idea is whenever the chain property goes away, whenever there are multiple chains around, somebody has to say which chain is correct. If there is a centralized authority which can say which chain is correct, use that. But then if you want to decentralize, because there is in the absence of any centralized authority, you let everybody just agree on the chain. So let run a Byzantine agreement protocol and let everybody agree on which is the correct chain, and whichever is the correct chain, you proceed with that and job done. So that will be a solution which is cryptography plus distributed computing solution. It will solve the double spending problem also. Just let the peers agree on the correct chain. A recall Byzantine agreement problem using distributed computing alone you could not solve. But then given that you already brought in cryptography and digital signatures, you can solve. There is something called authenticated Byzantine agreement, where if you allow people to sign, then you can have fault tolerance to the highest level possible. For instance, for 1 out of 3, which was impossible, there is a authenticated Byzantine agreement protocol that works like this. So we won't go into the details of this particular protocol, but you can imagine that with signatures protocol will exist, because now you can find out who is the liar, and therefore nobody will lie, because if they lie, they'll be found out. So because all messages are signed, and therefore since nobody lies, the only problem is about crash failures. And you can have a solution where as soon as it crashes, you can say run one more round to detect who URL crashed and remove them, and this will continue till no more crashes occur. And once you have a round with no failures, next round you can stop. So that will be a authenticated Byzantine agreement protocol. If you do that, you can get a decentralized cryptocurrency as follows. You can simply decentralize the trust on me and run agreement protocols to agree whenever there is confusion. So whenever there is double spending, you run agreement protocol and say which is correct. And whenever there is no confusion, you just continue, and you will get only cryptography will solve as long as there is no double spending. And whenever double spending is there, run a distributed consensus protocol to find out which of the chains is correct. Now, given that there is no moral things here, you are free to choose whichever chain you want at random. So there's no requirement that one chain is superior to the other and all. You can have all those things in. Also, you can have prioritized agreements also, but given that you're to solve the double spending problem, you don't need any priority. You can choose any one of the chains at random, and they'll solve the problem. And in any case, we knew that once it has the chain, it has the cryptocurrency property, and therefore we are all set and done. Only thing is that when you say you run agreement protocol, you presumed that you know who are all the people to agree. So when you say run agreement, Byzantine agreement protocol between A, B, and C, what you mean is all non-faulty processes in A, B, and C have to agree. But in real life, you may want to have cryptocurrencies in open systems. By open systems, I mean nobody keeps track of who are all there in the system, who is coming, who is going. Nothing is kept track of. At any given point, there is no centralized authority who knows who are all there in the system, and therefore nobody knows who are all to agree. And therefore, since you work in an open system, how do you run a Byzantine agreement protocol saying that all of you should agree? Therefore, this solution which is described so far indeed solves the problem to a large extent in closed systems where you know who are all there, and you can run a Byzantine agreement protocol and make all of them agree. But in open systems, this does not even start working, because you actually do not know who are all to be part of the agreement, because people can come, people can go. So how do you make a system where if there is double spending and somebody has to find out what the chain is, how do you make a system where you do not know who are all there in the system, but everybody who is there in the system will agree? There it looks daunting, and that's where we bring in a third field called game theory and solve the problem. So this is the blockchain approach. So it'll take another 10 minutes to understand the entire blockchain approach, and then we are all done, because we have seen the solution this far. We just have to see how blockchain solves it for open systems. So it will simplify the whole thing by game theory and do the job. So let us see how it does that. So blockchain approach, as we already said, we are already publishing the transaction history, and therefore we know that all double spends are detected, but no centralized authority exists to correct it. Now question is, when in the absence of any centralized authority to correct it, how to go about it? So we said simply agree on the peers. The peers will agree on which is correct. Blockchain says that agreement protocol will be very difficult if you do not know who are all the peers in the first place. So it gives a solution. The solution works as follows. So I have written a statement like any randomly picked guy, usually called the miner, can append a new block. Right? It's not only me, like in Trust Me Kind, that can append, or it is anybody, and it's not just anybody, that anybody should have no monopoly, should be randomly picked. Now why is this statement given here and why is it important will be clear by the time we finish the slide. So for now, let us assume that this randomness property holds. That is, anybody can add the next block. It's not necessary that only the person who is the owner who transferred, the new owner should not is the person who adds. Anybody can add on behalf of the new owner. The new owner is signing a but anybody can add, but nobody has any monopoly. The person who's authorized to add is actually chosen randomly. Now to begin with, let us assume this property is there and see how it solves the problem, and then how to get this property we'll see later. Suppose you have this property, then we can make all peers agree on the correct chain. Correct chain here means some chain. The question is how. You cannot run a bicentennial agreement protocol because you do not know who are all there to agree in the first place. So what do? So you do simply the following. Just assume that the longest chain is the correct chain, and have two further game theoretic properties here. You ensure that appending to the longest chain is rewarded in some way. So incentivize adding to the longest chain. You penalize adding somewhere else. If you do this and have the randomness property, game theory argues that in the equilibrium there will be one and only one longest chain, and therefore you can deem that to be correct. Let us see why. Why does that happen? Now we already said to add to the chain you will be chosen randomly. Therefore, as the size increases, the probability that you will be chosen reduces. Therefore, you will get a chance once in a blue moon. More the number of people, the less the chance you will get to be picked, because you are randomly picked. Therefore, everyone knows that you will get in a large system when size is large enough. Everyone knows that you will get a chance once in a blue moon. You will not get a chance every day. You may get once in a year or something. You will get a chance once in a blue moon to add. If you add it to the longest chain, you will get reward. If you add elsewhere, you will get penalty. Now, any rational person who's not a fool will add to the longest chain, collect the reward, and leave the place, because he knows that there is no point in adding to the wrong place and get penalized, because he's not going to get a chance later. So suppose he's not randomly picked and he has monopoly and he can keep adding. There is a chance that he can keep adding to a shorter chain, make it longer than the longest chain, and then collect the rewards. So asymptotically, he can collect rewards, even though in the beginning, in the short term, he is penalized. In the long term, he can convert it to rewards if he has monopoly. But if he is randomly picked, nobody has any chance whatsoever. because they'll not get, once they get a chance, they won't get a chance for a while, and by the time the longest chain will be so long that next time you get a chance, by the time you get a next chance, the longest chain will be even more longer, that there is no way that anybody can actually play a game with the system. So game theory suggests that everybody will now start behaving rationally. That is, everybody will, whenever they get a chance, they will add to the longest chain and not add anywhere else. Now, given that this is the case, if once you have a longest chain, that is the longest chain, that will remain longest forever, because everybody will add to the longest chain, and if everybody adds to the longest chain, it will be getting longer and longer and longer. So there may be some situations where simultaneously they may add and fork, but one of them is going to be the next chosen by somebody, and therefore at some point one should be longer than the moment one is even slightly more longer than the other. People will ensure that that becomes the longest chain and everything else is orphaned. And there is no loss of transactions here, because once everything is orphaned, all those transactions can be put to a new block and added at the end of the longest chain, and making it even more longer. So no loss of any transactions. It is just that double spending will not be possible. So this is solving the agreement problem. The only question left for us, which is to discuss how do you get these three properties. What are the three properties? First property is randomly picking the guy who has to add. You cannot have monopoly in the system, because that will ensure that the person can actually make short things longer and take the reward later and confuse the system. If it is random, it works. So first question is, how do you pick in a random fashion? Second question is, what is the reward? Third question is, how do you penalize people? So if you answer these three questions, we are done. Now you can build your own blockchains by having three different protocols for achieving three different things. However, the way Bitcoin solves it is very pleasing. Why is it pleasing? Because it introduces a method which will solve all this in single shot. It doesn't say I will do random selection by some other protocol, I will give penalties by some other protocol. No. Single method, you get all these three done, and that is the pleasing way. Now what is that? It's called proof of work. That is, the person who is supposed to add has to give some proof that he worked very hard. And what do you mean worked very hard? Spent a lot of energy, real energy. So how does this help us? It helps us in giving universal penalty in first place. So if it takes minimum effort or cost to add a new block, because you have to prove that you did it, then automatically there is penalty for everybody. Whether you add in the longest chain or don't add, there is penalty. So one part of it is already got. Which part? Penalty for adding in non-long chain is got. Of course, there is penalty for adding in the longest chain also, but you can actually compensate for adding in the longest chain by a reward. For instance, in Bitcoins, it just says the miner can reward himself by some Bitcoins. From thin air, he can mine a few more coins and say, put those in my account. For instance, to begin with, they were saying 50 Bitcoins, and every 4 years it halves. So then it came to 25, then it came to 12.5. Now it could be something like half of 12.5. So that will be 6.25. So that is the Bitcoin policy, all right. But in principle, what they have done is got two properties here. One is, if you add to anywhere else but the longest chain, there is penalty. If you add to the longest chain, there is reward. And why is there reward? Because the reward far outweighs the penalty. Penalty is your current bill for mining. Reward is the Bitcoin value. So 50 Bitcoins, which they gave originally, may not a high value, but today even 1 Bitcoin is much more than your entire life current bill. So that is well worth the reward. So you got your two properties. One is penalty, other is the reward. Reward to add in the longest chain, penalty for not being in the longest chain. So what is now left for us? How do you get the randomness property? Now the way you create this proof of work will do that. So how do they create this proof of work? We know that the hash of the previous block should be stored in the current block, right? So and the hash of current block should be stored in the next block, and so on. So if we can ensure that the hash can change by adding some more fields to the block. For instance, instead of just saying the block consists of only the serial number, the coin, the transactions, and the miner's reward and other things. If you can add one more field called nonce, nonce means some random number there, right? Then you can keep changing the nonce to actually change the hash also. Now, if I say that you are allowed to add by, when we said you have to give proof of work, what is the kind of proof of work Bitcoin looks for? It says, I want you to give a nonce such that the hash is less than some threshold. I want to give you a nonce such that hash is less than the threshold. So for instance, it should start with 30 zeros, something like that. If you say the hash should start with 30 zeros. So then notice that because you have no way of predicting what the hash will be beforehand, only way people try is do a brute force search for such a nonce. And if you do a brute force search for such a nonce, unless you are too lucky, there will be a minimum amount of trials that you need to do usually before you actually hit upon a nonce, which will ensure that the hash is less than the given threshold. So that automatically serves as proof of work, right? However, it also automatically serves as random selection in some way. Why? Because the first person who wins, that is first person who solves this puzzle, that is first person who finds the nonce such that the hash is less than the threshold, will be adding, he'll add to the longest chain. Now the definition of longest chain changes, the definition of previous block changes, and therefore it is like things are set back to 0 and people will start the process again for the next block. Therefore, the first person who actually solves it is the person who's given the authority to add. So it may not be globally first, but at least locally, but not much difference if you can find, you can see that the gap between the first person who can solve it and the second person who solve it is not too small. Then you can see that it's not going to create any trouble at all in principle also. So the first person who solves it will add. Now, who is the first person who solves it? Given that you are to solve the hash puzzle, you will be choosing random nonce and doing it. Nobody can predict who the first person will be, and therefore you have the random selection property. Also, the first person who solves will be randomly selected. He has to spend a lot of money to actually solve it because he has to pay his electricity bill, and therefore there is penalty automatically to everybody. And if he adds to the longest chain, he'll be getting reward. So we got all these properties intact, and therefore we can actually solve the problem. And how did we solve the problem? Let us summarize. So we take only cryptography and solve. You will get a solution like MyCoin, where unless the DAO spending is taken care of, and as long as it is a chain, it is a cryptocurrency, but no guarantee that it will be a chain. The moment if the chain property goes away because of DAO spending, it is no longer a cryptocurrency. You can fix that problem by bringing in Byzantine agreement and saying that as whenever there is a fork or whenever it is not a chain, one of the possible chains is agreed upon and rest of it are orphaned, and therefore it is back to having the chain property and therefore the currency property. However, if you do not know who are all the people who are agreeing and you are in an open system, then you have to bring in a third field called game theory and say that I will use proof of work to get the randomness property, the penalty property, and the reward property, and game theory will then suggest that longest chain can be agreed upon without any problem. And crypto, DC, dispute computing, and game theory together now comes and solves the entire cryptocurrency problem. So we started off with trust begets value, value begets size, and we are saying that using blockchains you can have trust got from size itself, and therefore it closes this very important loop. Now you can bootstrap this from anywhere. Earlier, because this was not a loop, it was L-shaped. You have to start a trust. Everything required a government. Everything required some basis point to start, because otherwise you won't get trust, then you won't get value, and therefore you won't get size. Whereas because you close this loop, now you can start anywhere. There is no need that you have to start from trust, and therefore you need not have any government backing. You need not have anything else. But you need to start somewhere, because initially if you can have all three as 0. There is 0 trust, 0 value, 0 size. That will remain stable there itself. So how do you start? So you have to hype somewhere, and if you hype somewhere, the other things becomes real. For instance, if Bitcoin, you hype the value. Once you hype the value, the size becomes real. Right? Once the size becomes real, trust becomes real. When trust becomes real, some real value comes. When some real value comes, then it can jumpstart that way. It is like your car starting with the battery. So battery is required for it to start, but once it starts, you don't require the battery. So similarly, once you kickstart this system, it'll continue to work and everything will be fine. So this much about the blockchain. So I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about the fact that the future is much more brighter than what we have done so far. So what we have done so far is simply tamed the impossibility of Byzantine agreement using cryptography and game theory, or in cryptocurrencies lingo, we have done banking without a banker. So we have decentralized the banker. There is no centralized banker, but we can do banking. What else can we do in the future? So I want to claim that you can do a hell lot of things in the future, and to prove that you or give evidence that you can do all these things, what we will say is there are some things that have already been done. For instance, banking without a banker, and there are some other things which are much tougher, which are also been done, and therefore everything in between also should have a solution sometime in the future, and that's what we will bank on. For instance, so taking decisions without a decider, can we do decentralized governance? The answer is yes, you can do. Why? Because we are going to see that something tougher than this has already been solved, and we know that something easier than this. For instance, banking without a banker is also solved. So sandwich theorem can be used to say that, oh, this should also have a solution. But what is the tougher thing than this that has been solved? We'll wait. So can you write stories without the writer? Yes, same logic. Can you make discoveries without the scientist? Yes, same logic, because there are tougher things that has been solved. So can you prove theorems without a prover? Can you invent without the inventor? All this can be done. Why? Because there is a tougher thing that has already been done, and there is an easier thing that has already been proved. The easier thing is the cryptocurrency blockchain, and the tougher thing is the following. So can you evolve creatures without a creator? So answer is yes, you can decentralize the creator job itself, the one of the most toughest jobs in the entire universe, to be the creator. So how do you decentralize the creator? Same logic. When randomness meets meets longest chain, meets penalty for not being in the longest chain, and meets reward for being in the longest chain, you can decentralize. So what is said Darwin's theory of evolution? It's a survival of the fittest. And what Darwin did not know at that time is the concept of DNA. So what is the survival of the fittest? That DNA that survives the longest. So the longest chain of DNAs is called the fittest. Now nature is choosing the longest chain. Okay, but then how does it ensure there is no monopoly? How a weak DNA cannot survive forever? There is randomness. So it's not like same DNA will be there. So there will be mutations, and therefore no DNA has any monopoly over nature. So there is enough randomness involved to say that there is no monopoly over the scheme of things. Okay, where is the penalty for not being in the longest chain? Penalty is death and predatory behavior and all that. So if you are not in the longest chain, if your DNA is not the strongest, you will die. So death is the penalty for not being in the longest chain. You will die much quicker than the other. So if you have no death at all, then the there's no penalty at all. But if you say the lifespan is also in milliseconds, then also there is no effective penalty. So it's a correct lifespan is important here to get the correct form of penalty. And where is the reward? So the reward is in the chemical hormones, in the general tendency to actually beget progeny. So and for humans there is a lot of pleasure hormones involved too. So every DNA wants to actually proliferate and beget more children, more progeny. So the chemistry ensures that there is a reward. It's a chemical hormone pleasure reward. So there is a chemistry involved in the reward. there is death and predatory behavior involved in the penalty for not being in the longest chain, and there is randomness involved to ensure there is no monopoly, and nature just chooses the longest chain. Therefore, if you can solve when randomness meets longest chain, meets penalty, meets reward, you can solve, you can decentralize the creator himself or herself. You should be able to actually decentralize banking also, which has already happened. You should also be able to decentralize everything and anything in between these two, and therefore this is not going to end. So with that, I'll open for questions.
Dear participants, anyone wants to ask any questions? You can put in the chat box. So if is there any questions? Anybody wants to ask any questions?
There is time, so we have 7 minutes.
Srinath.
Shakti, tell me.
This Shakti here. Yeah.
Yes, tell me.
So thanks for the wonderful talk. I joined a little late because of my proctoring things actually. So it was a very nice talk. So I could bring out one remark which you were talking about one thing that you were talking about, the penalty and the reward, right? So it seems like it is something similar to the reinforcement learning, where we were giving the system the reward and the penalty for it to learn it in a proper way. And here we are giving the reward and penalty for a human being to make something perfect. Right?
Yes,
It may not be perfect, but
yes,
the intent is to make it too perfect, right?
Right.
So it's just
yes. For
it's a very
instance,
similar idea, but the objective is there. It is machine. Here it is human being.
Yeah. So if your system is a centralized system, then just reward and penalty will do the job. You don't need randomness at all. You don't need longest chain. So if you have to, if you don't have control over the system should work on its own. There is no background controller. Then if you have a background control, just with reward and penalty, you can make things learn. If you do not have the background control, or control unit is not there at all, then you need two more things. You need to have randomness and you need to have longest chain.
Yes.
So you need to have randomness so that no single has any monopoly, and you need to have longest chain so that the game theory can play its role and say, okay, the survival of the fittest. So it is similar to reinforcement learning, but reinforcement learning is easier because you can have a centralized control. So you don't need. So I don't think you need randomness and longest chain properties in reinforcement learning. You can do with reward and penalty alone.
Yes. True. Yeah. You made the correct.
So if you want to design a decentralized reinforcement learning, what you said actually works.
Oh, this is a new area now.
Retain your penalty and reward. We know how to decentralize, how to make learning decentralized. Apart from your penalty and reward in the system, we just have to have some way to get in randomness and then some way for game theory to define the longest chain.
So maybe we can extend the area of reinforcement learning by making an assumption that if suppose you are not trusting the system, now how will you test reinforcement learning path, right?
Exactly. So for instance, if you want to do distributed reinforcement,
you able to hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. Yes. So if you want to, you are able to hear me?
Oh.
You are able to hear?
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
So if you want to have a learning system where the data is all private data and nobody is willing to give that data to anybody else, and still you want to give a proof that it will learn, then exactly what you said works. So you can have the longest chain and penalty, and you can get a situation where nobody knows what the data is because the data is not centralized. It's all there everywhere. Nobody knows what the data is. But using the same logic, you can say I can still learn and give you a proof that it has learned correctly because of the because no data has any monopoly, and therefore nobody cannot change the data to suit the make the learner learn the separate way. So any amount of local changes in the data will not change your final learning. So that we can bring in the randomness there and then make the longest chain work, whatever that means in longest learning work. Then we'll get a robust system where nobody knows what the data is, but still nobody can control by having malicious data built in the system. They cannot make the robust learning go awry. So currently it is like in a centralized system, you don't worry about malicious data. You don't think of what happens if some wrong data is given. You don't think of that case at all because you have centralized control in current reinforcement learning. But if you actually want to do distributed reinforcement learning, you have to think of situations where what if the adversary comes and gives all rubbish? Then suddenly there you cannot but go this way. Unless, of course, it is a closed system. If it is still a closed distributed system, you don't need all this. You can do it with the agreement protocol. As I said, you can make people agree on is the data correct. So run an agreement protocol and say all of you vote, tell me data is correct or not, and do something. But in a completely open system where you don't know who has the data, where the data is, who has to agree, then you have no other choice but to go the blockchain way.
Exactly. Yes. You succinctly explained that way, like the evolution, like you explained, like starting with a MyCoin, and then you went into the simulated trusted coin, and then you brought in the blockchain kind of a thing. It's very excellent, actually. It's not many people can do this kind of a talk, which builds up the fundamentals and then evolves slowly by taking things one by one, and then making it more complex and trying to explain the things in a simplistic manner. It's very easy. It's very easy to say, but to explain in a lecture, it's an art, and you are the expert in that.
So you are sure that people would have understood. That's what you're saying.
Okay, fine. Thanks a lot, Srinath.
Thank you very much, Dr. Srinathan.
So
three fields involved. Am I audible?
I just finished. There are 3 fields involved, and there are 6 permutations of these 3. So I started from crypto, brought in distributed computing, and then game theory. There are now we know that mathematically there are 6 ways of making such presentations. You can start with I can start with game theory, bring in other tools. So all the six ways are possible.
Yes. But this is a bottom-up approach, so it explains in a nice way because many people know about the crypto system, so you can slowly build with what they know.
So that is the reason I chose this. Whereas there was one other lecture I gave where we start with distributed computing first, then bring in game theory, and last crypto. So that was for networking people who know networking more. They don't know crypto. So similarly, we can try if you bring you start with game theory and bring in other 2. It will be interesting for those people. Like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I of course I am a cryptographer, so I chose crypto. No surprise.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Srinathan. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. And really is very enjoyable. No doubt the cryptography is there in blockchains we are using. But today only I came to know that also we can work using the distributed computing as well the game theory. And because of this is the new concepts that also we can correlate because of we can correlate with the blockchain. So with respect to the security point of view, I am telling. And because cryptography, no doubt it will be used, the different cryptographic primitives such as hash functions, elliptic digital signatures algorithms, no doubt it has been used. But the distributed computing and the game theory is also being used in blockchain. This is a very new idea, new concept. and hope all the participants they learn these particular things in these topics. And I request to the participants if anyone wants to also have to ask any questions in the offline mode also, and to in the offline mode also wants to discuss with the professors, they can send this mail also and can interact also with him. And if they want also some things wants to work with him also, they can also contact with him. So thank you very much, Dr. Sinathan.
Sir,
Yeah.
before I close, Shakti, sir, this your reinforcement idea mixed with blockchain, as far as I know, it is a new idea, so it has come out here. So why leave it? So maybe we should progress doing research with in that some collaboration. So with respect to participants. Sorry for the digression. So talk has ended. So I'm asking institute level collaboration. That is all. So nothing to do with the
definitely. Yes. It's a completely a new idea. Yeah. I think we should think about it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Sinathan, I have one question just I want to ask regarding what Dr. Shakti asked you regarding the reinforcement learning. So is there any relations with the zero knowledge proof of this reinforcement learning? Because of the, if anyway, without showing any evidence, without getting any informations, so if we can prove, right? So is there any relations between the zero knowledge proof and the reinforcement learning?
Yes. There are two. One is bad news, one is good news. So the good news relation is anything that can be learned can also be learned in zero knowledge. So that is good news. So anything that can be proved can also be proved in zero knowledge. Of course, we may not want to go beyond the class NP, but in practice, but you can also go beyond NP, and there you can actually show that anything can be learned in zero knowledge. Though I have not seen such a paper, but that's how it is. So that is good news. Now the bad news is the same cryptography can be used to prove that there has to exist non-learnable things. That is, things that cannot be learned in polynomial 10 has to exist. Otherwise, cryptography cannot exist. So, for instance, to show that CPA secure encryption algorithm exists, actually what you have to prove is no polynomial time strategy can break it, which means even reinforcement learning cannot break it. That is, you cannot keep giving it plain text, ciphertext, and hope that next ciphertext it will crack the plain text. If it does, then something wrong with the cryptography. So either cryptography, there are situations where either cryptography will win or learning will win. So that is the bad news. They're trading off. The good news is they can also come together. So philosophically, why can they come together? If you see, so notice that blockchain or crypto systems, including zero knowledge proof blockchains like Zcash, is about making trusted data emerge from programs. So you write consensus programs, and from that trusted data emerges. And learning is about making trusted programs emerge from data. So you give data, and what will emerge is a program which will do the job, like speech recognition and all that. So one learning is about making programs emerge from data. Blockchain is about making data emerge from programs. And now these two, there is no end. Now it becomes a chicken and egg problem. You start with one, then which came first is the question, data or program. So if you believe data came first, then you will do learning. If you believe programs came first, then you will do blockchain. But then you don't know which one, and therefore there is a big philosophical relation between these two, because in the future it may be that this will not end. The system will take data and then learn from that, and write program to emerge further data from that, which is more trustworthy data on its own. I'm saying. So today we have to provide data. Tomorrow it will get more trustworthy data on its own, then learn a more trustworthy program on its own, and then emerge even more trustworthy data on its own. And this will continue forever, and it will keep an ever improving system where it can build more and more trust into the system on its own, when blockchain and zero knowledge proof and reinforced learning come together, you will get a system where it can evolve in the trust axis also on its own. Today, it cannot evolve in the trust axis on its own. So there is a big relation.
Yes, true. Thank you very much, Dr. Srinathan.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll stop presenting anyway, so I'll disconnect.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Srinathan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Srinathan.
Yes, I think we need to talk about this maybe separately together with